Well, I must say that I will consider your advice. Even if I don't, I must hear it. I'm interested. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And just a quick request, could you keep questions crisp so that we can take as many voices as possible? That's the only reason. Yeah. Please come to the side, the lady in front and then the lady out there, and then we'll come to the center.
What a pleasure listening to all of you. I'm Farah, and I was wondering, you talked about the ordinary life and you talked about the disruptions of today. But there's one common line or one common aspect and story, which is tolerance towards gender-based violence, tolerance towards class-based violence, and we often hear about the 1% that gets all the advantages, 1% that makes all the money, and 1% that makes all the decision. I was wondering how you would take the planetary crisis and the gender disparity discrimination and come up with stories, novels, writings today. Because when climate change happens, there's child marriage. When there's salinity rising, there is urinary tract infection, reproductive health loss, all those problems, again, for women. So I would like to hear your thoughts on that.
Everything is connected, so I think some of your fiction has addressed some of these issues. But would anyone like to comment on this? No, thanks. We move to the next question. The two ladies at the back, and then I promise we'll come to the center where...
Oh my God. So I just want to thank Mr. Amitav Ghosh, first of all, for writing about climate change, ecology and coexistence. Because I believe literature can literally save the world, because when we read about climate change or ecology or coexistence in any article, we really don't give that much damn about it. But when we read about it in fiction, we really care. And being a literature major, I really want to say that has changed my life. So I want to ask Mr. Amitav Ghosh that he, being a writer about climate change, whose books or what kind of stories in real life or about in books has inspired him to write about these things in general, like coexistence, that we human beings are not the only living beings on earth. We really need to coexist, and coexistence matters. We need to take care of the earth and all the other living beings.
Thank you so much. What inspired you to write so much about coexistence? I think that's what I'm getting from.
Well, it was really the time I've spent in the Sundarban. I would say really, Leslie Marmon Silko and many Native American writers talk about how the land tells its own stories. And that's certainly been my experience. The Sundarban, I find, has so captivated my mind that it continues to constantly emerge in my writing, whether I want it or not.
We have two questions from the center. If you can see the gentlemen who've had their hands up for a long time. Sorry, in the middle row and then there.
Thank you, everyone. My question is for Amitav sir. Yesterday you said that it surprises you that how much we move by our life controlled by river. So you wrote is from Bikrampur, mine too, and my grandparents' old village, it went underwater as like you. So and in that village there was a palace from the Same dynasty. It also went underwater. So can we say that everything is glass palace? That nothing is the center of the world? That because this palace was once center of the country, but now it's all gone. So can we say that everything is glass palace? Even we.
It's certainly true that we in Bengal live in a completely unique ecosystem where there's a degree of geological instability that you don't really find anywhere else. Rivers change their courses all the time. People lose their homeland all the time. And I think this does work its way into our consciousness. I mean, I find that all my life, without meaning to, I've been writing about rivers and about water and about the sea. It's simply because I think it comes from being from certain parts of the world.
Thank you. We've also got several questions after you. After you, the mic's going to move to the right-hand side, which is historically underrepresented with questions. Okay, we'll come back to you. Please go to the right and then we'll come back to you. Sorry about it.
Thank you so much for that lovely session. This is a question to all three, and also it's reflective of the title of today's talk. It seems that the theme of all of your work is that very much of the Benedict Anderson-esque imagined communities and borders. Then the question about people moving and migrating, and also then therefore the ecological aspects for which we also migrate and we move around. So if we are humans, creatures of motion, when you write your stories, especially these small lives and the small stories, do you then think about whom you're speaking for, and therefore the voice that you're giving? And do you have your own battles as to whom you're speaking for and for the audience that you're speaking to? Thank you.
Abdulrazak, would you like to respond to that?
Who am I speaking to or for? I know who I'm speaking for. I'm speaking for me. So that's straightforward. So I don't have very much confusion about what the point of writing for me is to express what I see. Then what happens as a result of that, this is not, I'm not saying that I live in a bubble all on my own, but what I express is what I know and what I see, and these are my views. What I suppose I would wish would be the case is that somebody reading this would say, exactly, that's exactly how I've seen these things. Or possibly say, I never thought of that, that's interesting. Or, least likely, well, I hope not, say, well, this is a load of rubbish. But the primary impulse is not to speak for anybody, but to speak as I see things, and to hope that this will also have an echo for others and have meaning for others, and perhaps just some recognition to say, yeah, I can see this thing. Because this is how I read. When I read, my reaction is something like that. I receive what I read in that way. I receive what I read as, this is illuminating. This is not absolutely brand new idea, but this is something I've thought about, but I have not thought about it in quite this way. So that's one thing. Who do I speak for? Who do I speak to? Everybody. Everybody. I've never had this worry or concern about who is my audience, as it were. I just think I'm writing so anybody can read this if they wish.
Yeah, I completely agree. I would also add, I write really only for myself. What do I mean by that? I suppose I'm so preoccupied by the idea of making clear what I want to say. And I'm not really thinking of an audience, just in the way you're not thinking of who you're representing in your writing, because you're really focused on articulating certain aspects of your experience. Now, it's a great bonus when the writing goes out into the world, other people read it and like it. But in the end, as Abdulrazak said, anyone can access it. But in the end, you first of all writing it to clarify your own experience for yourself, and then sharing it with others. Also, I think the other point, question I made, how you cannot think about what you're representing, because your experience is shaped in mysterious ways. Like Amitav saying, he ends up writing about waterways or water bodies, and it's because his experience has been shaped by it in ways that he cannot really fully articulate. He can do it while he's writing, but he doesn't know what is happening. So it's a very mysterious process in that sense. And I think questions of representation which make us very self-conscious don't really arise in that process.
I think it's because as a writer you're always transcending yourself, you're just speaking from behind the eyes of your characters so often. But anyway, sorry, I'll stop interpolating. There are so many hands up and the lady in red out there, and then we'll go back to that side and back to the center. Oh, this gentleman has been waiting. I'm so sorry. এটার পরে এখানে যাব.
Gender biased.
Is the mic not working? Just a second. Would you like this mic?
Thank you so much. Okay, so the time I have been speaking for and speaking from, right now representation is more cooler than ever. And you all started to write about apparently a small world when representation not as cool or as trendy as now. So thank you for that, of course. And my question is, when representation is now more cooler than ever, how do we as young writers actually fight the evil of misrepresentation? I actually ask this because in this time, like living in this era, we are not dealing with the term of underrepresentation anymore, or dealing with the degree of underrepresentation as before. But we are in an era where we are often faced with misrepresentation. So as young writers or anyone, young storytellers, how do we fight with the term of misrepresentation?
I get it. You're asking how younger writers should deal with the problem of misrepresentation? Or the fear of misrepresentation? The problem of misrepresentation. I think a lot of that was just covered by these answers, but would anyone like to add to this, to speak to that fear that you might misrepresent? I'm sorry.
Look, I do think that one of the great anxieties that young writers carry is this fear of appropriation. You know, I see that people are really tormented about it, and I don't know how to address that except that to say, how can you write without appropriating? I mean, if I were never to appropriate anything, I would only write about a sort of middle-aged Bengali man. And how interesting is that? So I do think you have to sort of give yourself license to try and understand other points of view.
Thanks so much for that. The two gentlemen in the center who've been waiting for a long while very patiently. Thank you. The gentleman in red and then behind him.
Hello. Very mundane and crisp questions, I hope, for each one of you. To Mr. Ghosh, you have so much research in your paper. I actually learned a lot about my family history from reading the classroom. I won't go into the great details of it. So, how important do you think it is to have that much research into your novels? And then I'll quickly go to Mr. Mishra. One of the most fabulous books I've ever read is Butter Chicken in Ludhiana. But if I remember right, this was published way after you submitted it, right? Would you go back and see I would have written it differently now than when I wrote before? And my final question is to Mr. Gurnah. Did you ever rub shoulders with Freddie Mercury?
Well, the research, I enjoy that. I think one of the great rewards of the life of writing is that you go out in the world, you meet people, you talk to people, you learn what they're, what people are thinking and so on. So that's a part of the job that I really love, actually. And I constantly draw inspiration from people I've met and seen. The question about rewriting a book. Yes, when you write a book, you enter into a kind of bubble. You create a bubble, and everything you're writing makes sense within that bubble. But once you step outside that bubble, you can never really go back into it. So now, if I were to, try to read something I've written before, I'll probably end up rewriting every sentence. But I wouldn't, because I know that that book belongs in that particular bubble.
I'm very insulted you didn't ask me the Freddie Mercury question. I think, I agree with Amitav. Rewriting, especially travel books, I'm thinking of Naipaul going back to do those journeys in Muslim countries. The result is not quite first rate, because the initial impulse has been lost. The initial hunger and curiosity has faded. And now you're really traveling to confirm your prejudices, which have, congealed and really cannot be got rid of anymore. So I think it's best to work with those fresh impulses and not try and sort of, go back to ground you've already covered.
Freddie Mercury, eh? I'd never heard of Freddie Mercury. Until people started saying, oh, he was born in Zanzibar. Did you know him? But I think his parents left when he was like 3 or something like that. So no, I didn't know him. And I don't know very much about him at all. And in fact, quite a lot of people in Zanzibar know nothing about him either. There is a restaurant which is actually, as it happens, is owned by a relative of mine, and it's called the Mercury. And tourists, when they go to Zanzibar, have to go there. So it's onto a really good thing. But it's really only tourists who go there, because it doesn't really mean anything very much to people in Zanzibar. I guess there may be people who are interested in music who might now say, really? Was he really? But I don't think he figures very much in sort of, rubbing shoulders with people. No, he doesn't figure that.
Thank you so much, and I'm sorry to those who haven't been able to ask their questions, but we really are out of time. And I just wanted to say a big thank you to the 3 of you, for this conversation and for everything you will convey to us.
Thank you.